Welcome to my second video on the GRP Synthesiser A4, or the A4 Revisited. Now this video is going to mainly centre around the sequencer and what it does, but we'll cover some other aspects of the synth as we go. Now what you can see there running is a 16-step sequence. The A4 actually has two 8-step sequences. They are completely separate sequences, but we can chain them together like we're doing here. And at the moment we're just listening to one oscillator playing. It's actually oscillator number 2. Let's introduce oscillator number 1. And you'll hear there that its pitch is not being controlled by the sequencer, and that's because the sequencer can control the pitches of the 3 oscillators separately. Let's introduce oscillator number 1. So now they're both being controlled by that 16-step sequence. But we could choose to use just the first 8 steps to control the pitch of one of the oscillators if we wanted to. So let's try that. Now there are some controls to the left of that main sequencer section, and those controls are controlling each of the 8-step sequences individually. We've got a quantized switch, we've got a range switch for setting the range of the potentiometers, and we've also got a glide control, one for each of the 8-step sequences. So we can do things like this. So the glide is only on the first 8 steps. And now the second 8 steps. And of course we can apply it to both. Let's add a third oscillator. Now let's take a quick look at the filter. I'm just going to add a little bit of envelope modulation to the filter. I'm running the filters in stereo mode right now. So the left hand filter is what you're hearing in the left channel, and the right hand filter is what you're hearing in the right channel. And one thing I like to do with the stereo mode of these filters is to add a little bit of stereo panning. Now, right in the middle there is an auto pan facility, but it's a very, very simple facility. And to be honest with you, I'm not really keen on the effect that it gives, because there's no control over the width of the stereo effect. And as you can hear there, it sends both channels to each side in turn, so we're getting distortion. I mean, obviously if I turn down the volume right now, we wouldn't get that distortion. I prefer to use the filters in stereo mode to give the same auto pan effect. So what I'm going to do is introduce some filter modulation to both of the filters, that same LFO that was being used for the auto pan. So you can hear the cutoff is making the sound get louder and then quieter. Now one of the great things we can do with these filters is to reverse the phase of the modulation, so invert the modulation. And by doing that to one of the channels only, we now get 180 degrees out of phase, and we get that kind of auto pan effect, which can be as subtle or as drastic as we want it to be. just going to add some reverb, just a little bit, or maybe a lot actually. That's better. Let's try the ring mod. Right, so let's come back to the sequencer again. So on the right hand side we've got a whole load of controls for controlling the sequence as a whole, and the first control we're going to play around with here is the direction. So we're running forwards at the moment, but we can go backwards, we can go forwards then backwards, we've got a pendulum option, which is not going to play the first and last steps twice like the forwards and backwards option does. Then we've got an alternate option, which is really cool. It's alternating between the first 8 steps and the second 8 steps. Then we've got random. And the last option is called trigger, and that's for applying an external trigger to the sequencer. I haven't got one set up here, so it's not going to do anything. The next control to look at is the clock division control. So the sequence is currently playing as fast as it can based on the current clock that we've got set, but we've got all these different divisions here, so let's just slow it down a bit. And while it's slowed down, that's a good opportunity to look at this next control, which is a repeat control. So we can repeat each step twice, three times, four times, we can play the current step and then the one next to it. So we get 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, etc. We can play the current step, then the next step, and then come back to the current step again. So we get 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5, 4, etc. And then finally we can play the current step twice, then the next step, and then the current step again. So we get 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, 3, 2, 3, 3, 4, 3, etc. And this is a really cool option to have with also the alternate direction. So we've covered using the sequencer to control the pitch of the oscillators, but we can also use it to control the speed of the clock of the sequencer. We can either have the first 8 steps controlling the speed, or the second 8 steps controlling the speed. So first let's listen to the first 8 steps controlling the speed. But actually it's probably better to try this out in just normal forward direction, so let me just do that. So this is with no modulation. And with. And now with the last 8 steps controlling the speed. So as well as pitch and speed of the clock, we can also control pulse width. So I'm just going to isolate oscillator number 1 because that's playing a square wave. And let's hear what it sounds like when we use the sequencer to modulate pulse width. Now the effect is really quite subtle right now because I've got distortion going on with the filters and resonance and stuff like that. So I'm going to turn all that stuff off. So that's with no pulse width modulation. And with. And obviously we could be using the glide controls on the step sequencers as well to give a more fluid effect. So far we have seen the sequencer modulating pitch of the oscillators, pulse width, as well as changing the clock speed. The final thing that these sequencers can do is to modulate the cutoff of the frequencies of the filters, either individually or together. Now a really cool effect is to have the first 8 steps modulating one filter and the second 8 steps modulating the second. Now while we're listening to this sequence and I'm fiddling around with these controls, what I thought I'd do is just give you an illustration of the modulation capabilities of the GRP A4. It's very much like a whole kind of modular rig, except there are no patch points and you don't use patch cables in order to create modulations and affect the signal flow. But instead what we have is whole loads of switches and potentiometers to do those modulations and control the flow. What I thought I'd do is to actually kind of overlay this video and show you with some kind of virtual patch cables what all of the modulation capabilities are of the synthesizer, to give you an idea, if we did have patch cables, what we could do with this synthesizer. So that's showing you all the different modulation routings, and I'm actually ignoring the small patch bay to the very bottom right of the synthesizer. That is also allowing us to do some patching, basically bringing in signals from outside or taking signals out. That's all. Thanks very much for watching.